For months, maybe even years now, we've heard the back and forth, the promises, the critiques from both sides. The 2024 election has been nothing short of a roller coaster, and now we're finally at the point of making a choice. Our next president, the 47th, who will set policies that could directly shape your retirement. At the forefront of this election are some key issues impacting retirees, such as Social Security, Medicare, caregiving support, prescription drug costs, inflation, and yes, taxes. These are issues that hit close to home, impacting your finances and health. Yet with so much noise from the negative TV ads and the talking network heads, it can be hard to know who to trust. That's why today's episode is all about giving you the facts. No frills, no spin on where each candidate, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, stand on these critical retirement issues. What do they actually propose for your Social Security? How will they plan to handle skyrocketing healthcare costs and inflation? And what about the tax policies that could directly affect your savings? If you're ready for a clear, unbiased look at what's at stake for your retirement in this election, you're in the right place. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and tune in as we cut through the noise and get down to the details that matter for your financial future. So before you cast your ballot, make sure you have all the facts. Welcome to Retirement Rescue Weekly, where we throw a lifeline to your financial future. This podcast is dedicated to helping rescue retirees from potential dangers that appear in retirement. I'm Kurt Arnold, your host and financial advocate. I'll guide you through the stormy seas of retirement. We'll tackle inflation, taxation, market volatility, and healthcare costs. Together, we'll secure your retirement. Tune in and start your rescue mission today. Well, hello again. Welcome to Retirement Rescue Weekly. I'm Kurt Arnold, your host and financial advocate. And today we're talking about elections. Elections have been something we've been talking about for quite a while, seems like, for our country. Elections could introduce some significant uncertainty into the financial markets. Political positioning, policy proposals, the potential for changes in government can actually lead to actual and perceived risks and opportunities. Investors reacting to these risks and opportunities can cause some temporary volatility in the markets. And of course, it can cause some temporary concern and anxiety. So what do we do when it's an election year? What do we do different? How do we handle our portfolios and our retirement when it's election season? So we're going to talk about that today, as far as kind of learning from things historically about how the markets work during election years, and hopefully glean from the history to help us understand what we should do today. So we're going to talk about the great retirement debate, Trump versus Harris on your future. And like we always do, we like to start with a quote, and we're going to start with Stephen Dover, CFA with Franklin Templeton Institute. And he says, today, the more likely outcome of the U.S. November election appears to be a divided government in Washington, the norm for the past 5 decades, and one markets typically welcome. So what does that mean? Basically, is the markets like it when there's a divided Washington, where maybe someone's in the White House and in different parties in different parts of the other parts of the government, because then one party doesn't get too much control and get things moving too fast as far as getting policies passed. They like it where there's obviously some give and take. The markets don't like uncertainty. And that's where sometimes the market's getting nervous about when that happens. Dan Kemp, Morningstar Investment Management, says, when investors face uncertainty, they might seek narratives that predict the future, and that can lead to change their portfolios accordingly. This can lead to volatility in asset prices, risking investors being whipsawed as prices overshoot in one direction and then another. So it's vital to remember the old investing axiom. Don't just do something, stand there. The most important thing an investor can do is stick to their plan and avoid reacting. And I highlighted that because that is incredibly important. This election season happens every 4 years. But the key thing is that you have a financial plan and you stick to it. I hear too many people in my industry even saying things that they're recommending that their clients do differently for the election. Which is scary, because it's like, well, what were you doing before that? And I've had many clients that, from watching the news, talking to people at work or friends or family, they kind of call in a panic because they're like, what do I do? I feel like I should get out of the market. I'm just so worried about all this stuff. And it's because they're listening to all the noise and they're forgetting that they have that financial plan in place, because no matter what the event is, whether it's the election or something else, we got to make sure we have that plan for it. So investing in election years, what do we know? U.S. stocks have trended up regardless of who is in the White House. Investors often get nervous and move to cash during election years. Staying on the sidelines has rarely paid off, though. It's time, not timing in the market, that matters most. S&P 500 had 2 negative years of the last 20 election years. And that was in 2000 for the dot-com bubble and 2008 for the real estate crisis. And those drops were attributed to asset price bubbles, not the actual politics. So one thing I always talk to my clients about is understanding what we can control versus not control, because what happens a lot of times is, as human beings, we want to control everything. And if we can't control some things, that keeps us up at night. So let's understand what we can control and not control. We can control how we save and how we spend. Having a good spending plan, a retirement income plan, is incredibly important, because no matter what happens, we should have this covered on a monthly basis. Asset allocation and location, making sure that we are taking care of our taxes, making sure that we're diversified the proper way, making sure our risk tolerance is correct. We have total control over that. We have some control while we're working about where we work and how much we earn. Obviously, some control. Doesn't mean you can just go and, say, I want 6 figures now because I got to, get this stuff figured out better. And we have some control over longevity as well, which means if we take care of ourselves, eat right, get sleep, things like that, we can have some longevity. But the things that we have no control over is the market returns, tax and benefits policies. Now, we can vote for people that can help with some of these things, but we have no control over this. So every time the market goes up and down, I always remind people, remember, we don't have control over this. We have control over this, and to some extent this. So don't forget that, because that's really important. Which party does the best for investors doesn't really matter. You see the red and blue. Market's going to go up no matter what. Obviously, there's some things on the short term that they can have a slight impact on, but market continues to go up. Typical stock market during the election years, obviously there is some volatility during the primaries as we're kind of learning who's going to be representing the parties. And then after the primaries, the markets start to get back going again. Now, if you look at this very closely, which is what it feels like when you're living it, is the market goes up and down, right? And that's why we don't look at the markets that closely like this. But if you look at it from a longer point of view, it's trending up still yet, even though there's volatility. And that's because of the uncertainty. We are still trending in the right direction. So what mistakes do investors typically do? Well, they go from, having their money in the market because that's what they're supposed to do, because we got to, counteract inflation. But then as we get to the election year, then they're moving to cash because their fear sets in, because they're not really following that. Hey, I have a financial plan. I know this is going to happen every 4 years. I know I have my risk tolerance set up, but for some reason this thing is different. So I got to change it. And that's what happens a lot of times, is they go to cash and they're making some mistakes then. So we have to also understand the impact other things could potentially have when it comes to the elections as well. Now, policy uncertainty, obviously, if there's a new administration taking over and there's some changing of the seats in the House and Senate, it presents potential for changes for economic policies, which that can cause some market uncertainty. Market sentiment, investors can be influenced by campaign rhetoric, media coverage, debates, polling data. I think back to the last couple elections. If you thought about, who they were projecting to win and by how much, it doesn't end up that way. Even at the end of this year, they were anticipating, or at the end of 2023, they were anticipating we're going to have a recession. And that didn't happen. And they were anticipating we're going to have so many rate cuts last year, and that didn't happen. So, again, don't get caught up in the news cycles too much. Economic indicators, sometimes when we're going into election and the economy and some of the data that we have, if it's stronger, then we think, oh, this is going to be really good then. And then also on the flip side, if we have some weak indicators, that can cause some concerns in the future as well. So that's where we have to be really careful that, we're not getting too caught up in some things like that and forgetting, again, the basics of what we control versus what we can't control. So what I want to do is I want to help you understand where each candidate stands on these key issues. And what I did is I did a lot of research to see where each candidate has either been printed, quoted, or at a debate or rally or whatever has said on camera what they stand for these different scenarios that we're talking about. So I can help you understand side by side, here's what each one thinks about Social Security. And again, it's just information, it's education. There's no, hey, we think this person's better than the other person. Not at all. We just want you to be educated. So with that being said, let's take a look at how each candidate stands as far as this goes. Let's start with Social Security. The Social Security Trust Fund is expected to see a shortfall in about 10 years. Social Security has started notifying beneficiaries on statements in recent years, and if Congress doesn't act, millions of Americans may see cuts to the money they've earned. Trump promises to protect Social Security by growing the economy and says he won't touch the retirement age. Recently, Trump has campaigned getting rid of Social Security taxes.
But I will not cut 1 cent from Social Security or Medicare. And I kept my promise for 4 years and I will keep it again. And seniors should not pay taxes on Social Security.
Let's pause and reflect on this point. Currently, Social Security benefits are taxed as this. For married couples filing a joint return, if your combined income is $32,000 to $44,000, you'll pay taxes on 50% of your Social Security income. Now, if your combined income is more than $44,000, you can expect to pay on 85% of your benefits. Let's take a look at an example we talked about at a previous episode, the Tax Thompsons. Now, they have $100,000 of total income. They started their Social Security at full retirement age, did not do any proactive tax planning. Over their lifetime, they're going to pay $340,000 of taxes on their Social Security benefit alone, not including RMDs. Kamala Harris says, I believe Social Security is a sacred social contract that we have made with our seniors of America. I will always, as I have always in my career, fight to ensure that seniors have the dignity they deserve and have the protections they deserve, including the benefits they have earned and paid for. Current workers have their income taxed up to the $168,600 mark. Income above that amount is not subject to paying into Social Security. Employees pay 6.2% on all taxable wages, and self-employed individuals pay the full 12.4%. Harris has suggested extending the payroll tax to incomes over $250,000. Just last week, the Social Security Administration announced its cost of living adjustment for 2025 as 2.5%. Remember, we've been teaching that this COLA does not keep up historically with inflation. Harris is advocating for adjusting the COLA using the Consumer Price Index for elderly consumers, which could cause higher annual increases. So let's take a quick review. Trump is advocating for growth. Harris says funding adjustments. An AARP study shows that 48 million American family caregivers provide $600 billion in unpaid care each year, helping loved ones live independent in their homes rather than costly nursing homes. Both candidates say they're looking out for caregivers. Harris, as vice president, has already backed funding to support caregivers and expand Medicare for in-home care. Harris says this cause is personal for her after caring for her own mother as she battled cancer.
I took care of my mother when she was sick. She was diagnosed with cancer. And so it is a personal experience for me as well as something I care deeply about. Plus, for the family to send them to a residential care facility, to hire somebody is so expensive. To your point about being in the sandwich generation, there are so many people in our country who are right in the middle. They're taking care of their kids and they're taking care of their aging parents.
Harris would like to include in-home care in Medicare if possible. She has suggested offering short-term help to give primary family caregivers a break. Medicare enrollees would be independently evaluated to determine their need for assistance with daily living activities. Trump believes that family support and creating more private care options are key with less federal intervention.
That I will support a tax credit for family caregivers who take care of a parent or a loved one. It's about time that they were recognized, right?
So let's look at the tape again. Expand the support versus expand the options. Let's talk about prescription prices. Ouch. Harris supports expanding and accelerating Medicare's ability to negotiate lower drug prices. She wants to speed up negotiations so that more drug prices decrease more quickly.
We capped the price of insulin at $35 a month and the total cost of prescription drugs at $2,000 a year for seniors. And just yesterday, we announced that we are lowering the price by up to 80% for 10 more life-saving drugs.
Trump, on the other hand, has pushed for drug importation from Canada and transparent pricing to reduce costs. Trump's plan would tie Medicare prices for drugs administered in doctors' offices to the lowest prices paid among a basket of economically comparable countries. This was estimated to potentially reduce prices by up to 50% for some drugs. Trump also proposes a $35 monthly cap on insulin costs for Medicare beneficiaries. Let's take a look at our recap. Lower prices through negotiation versus cut costs through competition. Now onto Medicare. Trump says he's protecting Medicare and doesn't plan on changing eligibility or benefits, but favors adding more choices through Medicare Advantage. Trump wants to protect and preserve the program while addressing certain aspects of its management.
So first of all, there is a lot you can do in terms of entitlements, in terms of cutting, and in terms of also the theft and the bad management of entitlements, tremendous bad management.
Trump proposes reversing increases made to Medicare Part B premiums during the Biden administration. His campaign is focused on shifting resources to at-home senior care and supporting unpaid family caregivers through tax credits and reduced regulations. Harris is also a protector of Medicare and backs the Inflation Reduction Act to cap out-of-pocket expenses and expand benefits. Currently, Medicare does not offer hearing, vision, and dental, as well as long-term care. Harris proposes a significant expansion of Medicare to cover in-home health care.
We will restructure it so that Medicare covers the cost of in-home health care for your parent, so that they can be at home and you can then have the assistance with someone who can help prepare that meal, help them get dressed.
Similar to Social Security, Medicare also faces solvency issues. Trump argues that economic growth and job creation would increase payroll tax revenues, thereby supporting Medicare. Harris said she may support measures like extending the Medicare payroll tax to higher incomes. So in our summary, that's more choice versus more protections. Expect the Fed to continue to look at cutting interest rates in 2025, which will help with loan rates and minimum credit card payments. Trump points to energy independence, more drilling as a key to lowering inflation, plus less government spending. Trump has proposed imposing significant tariffs on imported goods, such as a universal tariff of 10 to 20%.
This is the policy that will save our country.
He's proposing a 60% tariff on everything from China and a 10 or even 20% on every import from every other country.
Countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world.
Harris supports price caps on essentials like healthcare and continued investment in renewable energy to stabilize costs. Harris wants to implement a federal ban on price gouging for food and groceries. So in review, energy independence versus economic control measures. And finally, taxes. Trump's message, keep tax low, especially through his 2017 tax cuts, which he wants to make permanent. Let's review the Tax Cut and Job Act that is set to end at the end of 2025. In it, the Tax Cut and Job Act lowered tax rates and lowered the standard deduction. Also, the estate tax exemption would remain at its higher level. Some argue that this could increase the national debt. Trump states his tariff plan would offset this. Tax cuts would benefit households across all income levels, but higher income groups would see larger benefits.
A reduction in the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%, solely for companies that make their product in America.
Harris and the Biden administration have pushed for tax hikes on higher earners, but promised no new taxes for those making under $400,000. Essentially, she wants to keep parts of the Tax Cut and Job Acts where they would extend cuts for those making under $400,000 annually, and for those above, they would see tax increases.
Proposed an increase of the corporate tax rate would boost that up to 28%, up from 21%, which aligns with President Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget.
The through line, I think, is imposing higher taxes on businesses and entrepreneurs and the wealthy, and then using that to redistribute income toward other parts of the economy, whether that's families or home buyers.
So in review, Trump is for keeping his tax cuts, and Harris is about taxing the top earners more. So both Trump and Harris bring different approaches to the table for Social Security, Medicare, inflation, and more. Which ideas make the most sense to you? Remember, knowledge is power, especially in retirement. Well, I hope that video was very educational and helping you understand where each candidate stands on those, particular retirement issues. Make sure you're an educated voter. Make sure that you understand the impact it could have on you and your family. So one thing we want to make sure we understand, though, as Barry Ritholtz says, the key problem is that nobody really knows anything. Political pundits, market strategists might have the best information in the world, but it's impossible to predict what will actually happen and how it's going to affect the market. Making investment decisions on broad, sweeping predictions can easily be just as wrong, is also unwise and dangerous. It's kind of like gambling. So be really careful. The key to take away from this, though, is make sure you have a financial plan. We talked about that in previous episodes about why that's so important. You probably saw me driving around on my road to retirement. It's really important to have a financial plan that will help you make sure that you're invested appropriately, that certain investments maybe not at more risk. There's some things that you're going to hear potentially, like with the tariffs. What impact is that going to have with foreign stocks? Got to know that. If the Feds continue to cut interest rates, what impact does that have on bonds? You got to know that. You have to understand, too, where are we getting our retirement income from, and where's our expenses, and what impact has inflation had on that? You got to really understand all these things. So all these things that we're voting on, financial plans should have been well in place before that, and make sure that we, review and adjust. But really, we should make sure we have that financial plan in place. That's the key thing to understand. So where do we go from here? Some key takeaways. Make sure that you have a written financial plan. It's incredibly important. I can't stress it enough. Make sure you understand what your financial goals are and when do we need to reach them? When are we hoping to retire? When are we going to need some more income? Things like that. What do I need to do to reach them? Am I on track? Or what are some things I have to do to tweak that? Risk. How much risk can I tolerate? We're talking about things affecting the volatility of the market based on who's going to win an election. Make sure that your risk tolerance is set up correctly for you right now. Do you have the appropriate asset allocation for your goals, time horizon, and risk tolerance? Incredibly important. Again, if you were driving a race car around a mountain right now and you didn't feel comfortable, this is not the time to be doing that. You got to make sure you're allocated appropriately for you and your goals and your life stage. And again, that's where the income planning is so important. How can I make the transition from accumulating to decumulation? That's, the part of transitioning into retirement. We talked about that in the previous episode too. Different than it is when you're working. When you're in retirement, these things hit differently. So you got to make sure you understand having that different mentality and different things set up in retirement. Am I keeping my investment costs to a minimum? Making sure that you're understanding that part. Am I investing in a tax efficient manner? Sometimes when the market does go down, that's going to provide some opportunities for us to do some tax planning. So, and then also we got to make sure that, we've talked about the different tax plans that each candidate has. What impact would that have based on who wins? So we've got to make sure that, one of the things we can control is if we're holding our money in a tax-free bucket, it doesn't really matter who wins because we've already paid tax on those dollars. So if they decide to tax further, our money's out of that bucket. Now, I'm not telling you to go and move it all there all at once because that's going to defeat the purpose a little bit. But make sure that we're aware of what we can control versus things that we got to take some action on. And then, of course, are we maximizing your overall life well-being and not just your financial well-being? So don't let these things get to you. There's so many people that just get stressed out and anxiety about this. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself mentally and emotionally as well. So again, what we always like to do is give back. I took a topic today that some people would say, hey, don't talk about that stuff. but it's important because I know you probably have thought about it. It's really, really important. So we want to make sure you're educated on, how should we invest in election years and what should we be doing differently? And then what does each candidate really, believe about as far as these key retirement issues? Again, we go back though to the basics for you. What can you control? And that is making sure you have a financial plan. Financial plan is really that retirement navigation map that helps you understand where you are today and where you're trying to go and how do we get there. And if you remember on the video we looked at last week, sometimes there's roadblocks and detours. These election things, sometimes they could be a detour. Sometimes it's just a bump on the road, depending on what happens. But make sure we have that plan in place, because otherwise everything is just reaction and emotion. And that's where we make mistakes. So having that plan in place is so, so important. The retirement navigation map, again, it's complimentary. I've had people in my industry that says, hey, you could charge $5,000, $10,000 for the kind of work it is. We're not going to do that, but we want to make sure that you have that information for you and your family. We're going to address your income plan, investment plan, make sure the risk is appropriate, make sure you're not investing in the wrong things as these things start changing. Tax plan, we saw the different tax plans each candidate wants to do. Again, doesn't matter until it actually gets approved. But what impact could that have on you and your portfolio? Medical plan, we talked a lot about caregiving and Medicare. How is that going to impact you? And then the estate plan too. Obviously, the estate tax could change in 2026. There's some other things too with taxes and things we have to be aware about. All these things could be impacted, but make sure we have a financial plan to address these things. It's really important. Now, we have a link in the show notes that's going to tell you how to get started with your complimentary written financial plan. So make sure you go there and take advantage of that. In the meantime, make sure if you have any questions, reach out to us. Make sure you get out and vote. That is your right. Make sure you take advantage of that right to make sure that you have the ability to select the candidate you feel is the best for you. Again, we are live every Thursday on the East Coast and 8 a.m. on the West Coast. It is a pleasure for us to be able to help teach you some of these things. Hopefully you found some value in this. Hopefully this helped you and maybe clarified some things for you. Again, thank you. And in the meantime, have a great week. We'll talk to you again next week.